At its peak, the British Empire ruled over 1/4 of the world's land and population. How did a small island nation achieve such unprecedented power? From tiny islands to global domination, this is a story of power, ambition, and conquest. We'll explore the voyages of discovery, the establishment of colonies across continents, and the immense wealth that fueled its expansion. We'll look at the wars fought, the cultures transformed, and the technologies that gave Britain its edge. But every empire has its breaking point. We will also delve into the decline, the fights for independence, and the final collapse that reshaped the modern world. This is the entire history of the British Empire, from its meteoric rise to its dramatic fall. The story of the British Empire begins not with grand fleets and conquering armies, but with desperation. In the late 15th century, England was a small island kingdom, still recovering from decades of internal conflict. It looked across the water and saw its rivals, Spain and Portugal, getting unimaginably rich from their new discoveries across the Atlantic. They had a head start, carving up the so-called New World between them, their ships returning laden with gold, silver, and exotic goods. England was being left behind. To compete, to survive, it had no choice but to turn to the sea. This drive led an Italian explorer, Giovanni Caboto, known to history as John Caboto, the court of King Henry VII, funded by English merchants, and with the king's blessing, Cabot set sail west in 1497, seeking a new trade route to Asia. He didn't find Asia, but he did land on the coast of North America, likely somewhere in modern-day Canada. He claimed the land for England, planting a flag on this vast, unknown continent. Though Cabot himself was lost at sea on a subsequent voyage, his journey was a pivotal first step. It gave England a claim, a foothold in the race for global influence. But turning that claim into a colony was a different story. The first attempts were disastrous. Sir Humphrey Gilbert tried to establish a settlement in Newfoundland in 1583, but failed, drowning on the return journey. Then came the famous lost colony of Roanoke. In the 1580s, a group of settlers led by John White established a colony on an island off the coast of North Carolina. When White returned to England for supplies, war with Spain delayed his return for 3 long years. By the time he got back, the entire colony had vanished without a trace, leaving only a single cryptic word carved into a post: Croatoan. The fate of those colonists remains one of history's greatest mysteries. These early failures were harsh lessons. Building an empire from scratch, thousands of miles from home, was incredibly difficult and expensive. The English crown simply didn't have the resources to fund these risky ventures on its own. It needed a new model, one that combined private wealth with national ambition. The solution came at the turn of the century. On the very last day of the year 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted a royal charter to a group of London merchants. Their official name was the Governor and Company of Merchants of London, trading into the East Indies. We know them today as the East India Company. This wasn't an act of government conquest. It was the creation of a business. Its goal was simple: to break the Portuguese and Dutch monopoly on the incredibly lucrative spice trade in Asia. The company's first voyages were small, risky expeditions to places like Indonesia and India. They weren't there to conquer, but to trade, offering English wool and metals for pepper, cloves, and nutmeg, which were worth more than their weight in gold back in Europe. To do this, they had to negotiate with powerful local rulers, like the Mughal emperors of India. They established small trading posts, called factories, in coastal cities like Surat. These were little more than fortified warehouses, designed to protect goods and merchants. At the same time, a new and more successful wave of colonization was beginning across the Atlantic. In 1607, the Virginia Company, another joint stock venture, founded Jamestown. This became the first permanent English settlement in North America. Unlike the get-rich-quick schemes of the past, Jamestown survived, though just barely. It faced starvation, disease, and conflict with the native Powhatan Confederacy. But it held on, eventually finding its own source of wealth: tobacco. The addictive crop became hugely popular in Europe, fueling a boom that attracted thousands of new settlers, seeking land and opportunity. Further north, a different kind of colony took root. In 1620, a group of religious separatists, the Pilgrims, sailed on the Mayflower and established Plymouth Colony in what is now Massachusetts. They were followed 10 years later by a much larger group of Puritans who founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. These settlers weren't primarily seeking wealth. They were seeking religious freedom, a place to build a new society based on their strict beliefs. These New England colonies developed a unique character based on small farms, tight-knit communities, and a thriving maritime economy of fishing, shipbuilding, and trade. So by the mid-1600s, the foundations of two very different kinds of empire were being laid. In the Americas, colonies of settlement were expanding, pushing native populations aside and creating new English societies. In Asia, the East India Company was operating on a different model, one of commercial empire. It wasn't about sending thousands of settlers. It was about controlling trade and extracting wealth. As the 17th century progressed, the line between trade and control began to blur. To protect its trading posts and ships from rivals and pirates, the East India Company began to raise its own private armies and build its own forts. It started to act like a state. When the powerful Mughal Empire in India began to weaken and fracture in the early 1700s, the company saw an opportunity. It started playing local rulers off against each other, making alliances, and intervening in regional conflicts. Slowly, almost unintentionally, a trading corporation was transforming into a political and military power. The profits from trade were now being used to fund armies, which in turn were used to secure more territory and more control, which led to even greater profits. This cycle, fueled by ambition and greed, was turning the East India Company into a de facto government. It was becoming an empire within an empire, a private enterprise that would soon command the fate of millions of people and control a vast portion of the Indian subcontinent. By 1700, England had been transformed. The small, insecure kingdom of 2 centuries earlier was now a major maritime power. It had a growing string of colonies in North America and the Caribbean, and a powerful, quasi-independent company laying the groundwork for total domination in India. The desperate quest for survival had turned into a relentless pursuit of power and profit. The British Empire wasn't built in a day, and it wasn't built according to a single grand plan. It was pieced together through trial and error, by merchants, missionaries, pirates, and pioneers. The stage was now set for this patchwork of colonies and trading posts to grow into the largest empire.
The year is 1914. The British Empire stands at its zenith, a global titan controlling a quarter of the world's land and people. But the storm clouds of war are gathering over Europe, and a single gunshot in Sarajevo will trigger a chain of events that will shatter this colossal empire and reshape the world forever. Welcome to the final chapter in our journey through the history of the British Empire, its decline, collapse, and enduring legacy. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 saw the entire empire mobilize. Millions of soldiers from Canada, Australia, India, Africa, and beyond answered the call. Fighting and dying in the trenches of the Western Front, the deserts of the Middle East, and the waters of the Atlantic, Britain and its allies emerged victorious in 1918. But the triumph was hollow. The war had inflicted a devastating toll. The economic cost was staggering, leaving Britain deeply in debt to the United States. The human cost was even greater, with an entire generation of young men lost. More than that, the war had changed perceptions. The immense sacrifice of colonial troops fueled a rising tide of nationalism. If they were fit to die for the empire, why were they not fit to govern themselves? The war pushed Britain to the brink of bankruptcy. By 1945, Britain was victorious but exhausted, a superpower in name only. The post-war Labour government, led by Clement Attlee, recognized that the empire was no longer sustainable, either militarily or economically. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was a final, humiliating nail in the coffin of Britain's imperial ambitions. Its imperial moment was over. English, the language of the colonizers, became the global language of commerce, science, and the Internet. The lines drawn on maps by British administrators in London continued to define the borders of countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, often with little regard for the ethnic or cultural realities on the ground, a source of ongoing conflict and instability. Sports like cricket and rugby, once used to instill British values, are now global passions. The Industrial Revolution, which the empire helped to fuel, kick-started the modern globalized economy. But this legacy is deeply contested. For millions, the empire represents not progress, but exploitation, violence, and oppression. It was built on the profits of the slave trade and the resources plundered from colonized lands. It imposed foreign rule, suppressed local cultures, and created deep-seated inequalities that persist to this day. Today, debates rage on. Calls for reparations for slavery and colonialism are growing louder. Museums are grappling with the ethics of holding artifacts taken from other countries. Nations are re-examining their histories, confronting the darker aspects of their imperial past. The story of the British Empire is a powerful reminder of how a small island nation rose to dominate the world, and how that dominance ultimately came to an end. Its rise and fall shaped the world we all live in today, for better and for worse. The Empire's story is not just history, it is a living part of our present. It serves as a profound lesson about the nature of power, the complexities of progress, and the enduring quest for justice and freedom. This was the entire history of the British Empire. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey through history fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. See you next time.